Have you ever had a moment in your life where something's been brought to your attention that you'd never ever thought about before, and it just shook your whole world? Well, that happened to me, and it was about a question that I had to ask myself from some information that somebody gave me. Many people could have this where they could be like later on in their years of life and they found out they were adopted, and it changes their whole course of events for the rest of their lives, because all of a sudden, if they reach out, they develop new family and things just change. But for me, being a Seventh-day Adventist, I had the most perplexing question that I asked myself. And it all came about because I found out some information that made me think, oh, that's not right. And there's got to be truth, and it has to be found in the Bible. Well, let me give you what this perplexing situation was. So it was about a history that is true and that can happen. The international dateline, it runs through different countries. And it even ran through a city at one time. I'm not sure if it still does or not. I think they might have moved it. They move the international dateline depending on money, really. Money moves it. So right now it could be Friday for you, but if they want to be on the other side of the dateline, it could be Sunday, and then they just move it. So which day is actually Saturday and which day is actually Sunday? Technically irrelevant, because it's wherever man places the line. And that made no sense to me. But what was even more staggering about that was that two people in one city could actually be shaking hands with each other on either side of this day line or international dateline, however you want to call it. One, from their own perspective, would see their friend worshiping on the seventh-day Sabbath on a Friday, and the other, from their own perspective, would see their friend worshiping the seventh-day Sabbath on a Sunday. But neither of these friends could ever see their friend worshiping on a Saturday. That just seems staggering to me. Saturday didn't even exist in the eyes of anybody looking at the situation. They could not differentiate who was actually on Saturday and who was not. Well, then that made me think of some more things. For me, being a Seventh-day Adventist that worshipped on Saturday, this made no sense at all. And I really needed to know what was true. And of course, the Bible has all the answers. And if we go to the Bible, as long as we use God's Bible rules, because if you don't, then nothing means anything. Technically, you can just believe whatever you want. You will find what is true and how this all works out. So then I needed to look into this. I needed to know if this were possible. I just thought I'd Google it. And when I Googled it, Google will actually tell me that in a 24-hour period, you can actually have three, not just 2 days, but 3 days, all at the same time. Oh, I hope nobody thinks this is one of those whatever symbols. Oh, don't do that! Sorry. Anyway, back to my point. This was really a life-shaking thought for me. The Sabbath in creation was one day. You had the first day of creation, second day of creation, third day of creation. I didn't think that they all ran into each other and there were multiple days in all one. Because if the Sabbath is one day, it's got to be one day on the earth in a 24-hour period. It can't be spread over multiple days. And while we can say it's within a 24-hour period, how can you have multiple days in a 24-hour period if Saturday is a Sabbath? It made zero sense to me. The dateline just goes zigzaggy all over the place. So this man-made invention that I believe is a device made by Satan to divide people really brought up some questions. And sometimes people would think, so back in the 1800s, because I know people will go and say, will bring stuff to me and they'll say, well, back in the 1800s, this was a thing to divide. I'm like, yeah, but if we study the history of that, they're wrestling what day is Sunday and what day is Saturday. Well, neither of them work out because it just doesn't work. So here, I'm going to go and I'm going to take you, I'm going to show you something else that goes by this. Because as a Seventh-day Adventist, we always believe that the day starts at even. And I believe the day starts at even. But I don't believe that even is just sunset, because the Bible also tells you that it's also morning. But as a person that believes that it's only sunset, we have more questions to ask ourselves when we see this. Now check this out. So with this whole international dateline thing, things got even more confusing. So this is Saturday, and this is what I always considered to be Sabbath. And I always believed that the day started at even. So here, which I believed was sunset, and it ended at even, which is sunset. But which even actually belongs to the day? Well, if I were going to talk to somebody who lives even in the same time zone as me, and I said I'm going to call them an even, the only way they could know is if I said the first sunset, which is the beginning of the day, or the second sunset, which is at the end of a day. So I have to tell them, in the start of the day or at the end of the day, because if I just said even, it's confusing. They wouldn't know if I was calling on Friday at sunset or Sunday at sunset. Without me saying any particulars, by only saying even, Saturday does not exist because they have no idea where I'm going to call them at which time. So I cannot actually tell somebody when I'm calling them if I just say I'm going to call them at even. And this was even more confusing and perplexing to me. But then it gets even more perplexing than that. Because of the international dateline, we have another challenge. You have 3 days on the earth at the same time. So if I was talking to somebody that was not in my time zone, and I'm not sure where they are, they could be in some other time zone across the world. And you can Google this for yourself. I'll probably actually just post it here. That you actually have 3 days on the earth all at the same time. And they're not within a 24-hour period. It's really confusing, just as this is all confusing. The international dateline is a device by Satan to divide people. And it's not just about what people used to think about, which day is actually Saturday and which day is actually Sunday. It is actually a device to divide even more than that, because the international dateline is set up completely based on money, and it has nothing really to do with anything else. It was put into kind of a vacant spot in the world, but it moves around due to money, economy, and that's pretty much it. So if I told a friend, one of us, hey, either one of us, at even on Saturday, you call me or I'll call you. And they're like, okay. So I didn't know where they were because I didn't pay attention to what country they're living in. But if I called them, say at my sunset on Friday, because for me that's even, I'm like, I'm going to call them at sunset on Friday. But they're in a different time zone than me, way over by the international dateline where it zigzags through the earth. I could either be calling them on Friday at sunset, or on Thursday at sunset, or at Wednesday on sunset. And they probably wouldn't be expecting me to call them Wednesday night when I said I was going to call them on Saturday at even. But the other way could go the other way around. If they were going to call me, they could either call me Sunday, or sunset on Monday, or sunset on Tuesday, because you have 3 different days, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And because there's no sunset in the middle of the day, it's either at one end or the other, you now have the whole week being Saturday, and that made 0 sense. So being perplexed with these questions and just not even really knowing where to start in the Bible, because here I'm Seventh-day Adventist, we just assume Saturday's the Sabbath. I just assumed we got it from the Bible, but lo and behold, Saturday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Sunday, none of those days are actually in the Bible. And the only authority that we have on it is the Pope, and that the people that killed Jesus kept it. And then we have a scattering of different Christians that kept it throughout, but we have no idea why or how. And I was just wondering, how does this work? This is one of the greatest things to understand, especially as a Seventh-day Adventist. One of the greatest questions, and it must be in the Bible. How can you... If God wants us to keep the Sabbath day, it has to be a plain, thus saith the Lord, for what day it is. And we can't just go, I believe it's Saturday because the calendar that man made told me so. Like, that didn't make any sense. So I actually thought I'd just type in one thing in Google, and it was International Dateline and Sabbath, and one video came up. And I'm just going to play a little clip from this instead of me just trying to explain it, because they have better pictures. And now, while I might not support this ministry and everything they do, I do believe that they have a fairly decent grasp on the Sabbath.
Samoan Islands and Tokelau. In 1892, the IDL was moved to the west of the Samoan Islands. This was achieved by observing Monday, July the 4th for 2 consecutive days in the islands. 119 years later, in 2011, Samoa shifted the IDL back to the east by removing Friday, December the 30th from its calendar. Tokelau, a nearby island belonging to New Zealand, made the transition as well. Today, the IDL passes between the islands of Samoa and American Samoa. The majority of SDAs in Samoa now worship on the new Sunday because they say the continuous weekly cycle is what matters. Yet they ignore the fact that the 2011 adjustment was only returning Samoa to the calendar week it was observing prior to 1892. This is utterly nonsensical and again makes clear the fallacy of claiming that the modern week has cycled continuously and without interruption since creation. Kwajalein Atoll. In 1993, Kwajalein, one of the Marshall Islands, removed Saturday, August the 21st from its calendar, causing the IDL to be moved to the east. This brought Kwajalein into harmony with the other islands, which up to that point had been on a different day. Eastern Kiribati. In 1995, Kiribati moved the IDL to the east for administrative convenience. Prior to this, the Republic of Kiribati was divided by the dateline. 4. Modern Jews admit a problem. Within modern Judaism, there are 4 major opinions regarding where the dateline should be. 1. 90 degrees east of Jerusalem. 2. 180 degrees east of Jerusalem. 3. Mid-Pacific, closely resembling the international dateline. 4. There is no specific dateline, observe when the locals do. While no genuine truth seeker should be looking to the Ashkenazi Jews for anything, the fact that there is any debate at all among the self-styled rabbis is indicative of a larger problem. 5. The Patriarchs and Prophets. So, how did the Patriarchs and Prophets manage time? Are we to believe that the antediluvian men of Yah and the post-flood Patriarchs and Prophets used a zigzagging imaginary dateline in the middle of what is now the Pacific Ocean to determine when the Sabbaths and feast days arrived? This is truly absurd. Again, the modern dateline was created in 1884 by mere men for the purpose of worldly commerce. 6. Noah's descendants. Think about this for a moment. When Noah's family began to grow and replenish the earth after the flood, some would have traveled east and some would have traveled west. Eventually, the 2 groups would have met each other on the other side of the world. Now, consider this. If Noah's descendants were observing a continuous weekly cycle, they would have been 1 calendar day apart when they met on the other side. For example, one group would be observing the 6th day, while the other group would be observing the 7th day. The reason for this is that those who traveled east were traveling towards the rising sun, beginning their days earlier with each eastward movement, while those who traveled west were traveling towards the setting sun, beginning their days later with each westward movement. Consequently, when the 2 groups met on the other side of the world, those who had been traveling east would be 1 day ahead of those who were traveling west. So, who would be right? Whose calendar would have been correct? The answer? If they had been observing a continuous weekly cycle, they would both be correct, which is not possible. This again demonstrates the fallacy of a continuous weekly cycle, and it validates the importance of having a dateline that is governed by the heavenly bodies.
So in this video, I'm not going into a whole lot of theology. I'm just kind of giving you the basics of it. We can see that when we go to heaven and the New Jerusalem comes down to the earth, that we'll be keeping the new moon and the Sabbath Every month we're going to be keeping the new moon, and every Sabbath we'll be keeping the Sabbath. And we read this in Isaiah 66:23, where it says, "And it shall come to pass that from one new moon to another, and from one Sabbath to another, shall all flesh come and worship before me, saith the Lord." So we know that's partly in heaven just by looking at this small section of the verse, because all flesh, it doesn't say only some flesh. So we know it's in heaven. And a lot of people will say, well, we never kept it before, but it was kept from creation. And there is one plain, thus saith the Lord verse for it. But here's another verse that will show that it was kept before that time. And it's in Psalms 81, verse 3. It says, "Blow the trumpet in the new moon, in the time appointed, on her solemn feast day. For this was a statute for Israel and a law of the God of Jacob. This he ordained in Joseph for a testimony when they went throughout the land of Egypt, where they heard a language that I understood not. I removed his shoulder from the burden, and his hands were delivered from the pots." So we know that this is talking about Joseph with a multicolored coat, because he was a bondman in Egypt. His shoulder was removed from the burden and his hands were removed from the pots. This identifies him. And the verse actually states that he was sent there to teach him about the new moon. And you can go back through history and you can see that they kept the solar calendar, and all of a sudden, right when Joseph went there, about that time-ish, all of a sudden they started keeping a lunar solar calendar. And then, it's just history. So the new moon always set the Sabbath. You have encyclopedias that say that, but now are supposedly debunked, even though they're old, and say that they're fake. And who wants to win the war is going to write the history, aren't they? So you can just erase whatever histories you don't want, as we see that happening continually today. But the Sabbath is fascinating. Saturday can't be the Sabbath. It doesn't exist. The harder we try to put Saturday to the Bible, the more it flops, and it just proves that it doesn't match the Bible whatsoever. And this was a huge question for me. This was something that changed the course of my life. It had a huge impact on my life. And now I keep the Sabbath according to the new moon, which means that my Sabbath can be Monday this month. It could be Tuesday next month. It could be Thursday the month after that. And that's how God's calendar works. And anybody who's familiar with God's calendar in the Bible should be able to see that. We have to remember that God was not a respecter of persons. God made his calendar set so that wasn't just for the Jewish people. The Sabbath wasn't just for the Jews. It was for everybody. His calendar just wasn't for the Jews. Right? The new moon, when you have the conjunction of the new moon, it happens over the ocean where nobody sees it. It doesn't give somebody a privileged spot. It shows that there should be no racism, no setting up a race higher than another, or denouncing a race as lower. Everybody is equal, and that's the beauty of the Sabbath. What people don't understand is that the Sabbath is a moral law. It is an anti-slavery law, and people have no idea that it has a morality component to it. But it means that you can't be slaves to anybody else, and you can't make anybody a slave to yourself. It sets you free, just like Jesus sets us free. Jesus is the true Sabbath, our true rest. And he appointed this day. It is a part of him, because the Sabbath was made for man, and he became a man. It was made for him just as well. It's my prayer that you'll look at these things and think about them. And there's many answers. And in a few videos, you can go back and you can see when a day starts. I have a video on that. I tend to leave a lot of videos with just enough meat for you to find it, to know it's true, and then to find more stuff for yourself. So that way you know it for yourself. Because you truly do not know anything unless you dug it out for yourself. If you hear it from somebody else, you heard it from somebody else, and that'll slip through your mind. But the things that you have to work for, you appreciate. And I'm praying that you will appreciate the Sabbath if you try to look for it. If you try to look for it through the Bible, it is there. It can be found. It is a thus saith the Lord, when you can take away all the deceptions that Satan has got. So many people think that they'll never be deceived. They put themselves on such a high pedestal that Satan could never deceive them. And they won't even accept it. Well, let me tell you, I was deceived. I have no problem admitting that. I've been deceived in many things. Eve, who was perfect, was deceived. That should tell us something. I pray that this is a great question for you. The greatest test of all time, as Seventh-day Adventists know it, must be found in the Bible. It can't be found in exterior sources that hide the true light of the Bible.